Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to talk about something that we see often, but we don't always know how to combat it, and that is the logical fallacy. What does that basically mean? Well, just think of how it defines itself. It's false logic. So whenever you are having conversations with someone and all of a sudden they're veering off in some other path or some other way, why are they doing that? A lot of times it's because they're on the verge of losing the argument and they don't want to, or because they don't know how to properly have good argumentation skills, so they just wander off the beaten path. But I want to talk about several different types of logical fallacies, and next time you're hopping on social media and you see people having a discussion, you'll see very often logical fallacies, and maybe you've used them too. Now, obviously, they're not always necessarily bad, but they're also the tool of a lot of times of someone who doesn't know how to argue. So you have to use them carefully if you're going to use them, but I'm going to teach you how to spot them. So when people try messing up the argument with you, you can say, oh, that's a logical fallacy. Try again and see how they do. Let's take the first one, and that is the straw man argument. Now, a straw man argument, you might think of like a scarecrow. Yeah, kind of. So when you think about the idea of, let's go back into like military training. So I get my rifle, I put my bayonet on, and I'm going to practice stabbing. Well, I could call a volunteer up and stab them, and then they die. Well, I need a new volunteer, and that's not fun. No one wants to get stabbed. So we create the straw man that looks like the actual man. So we can stab the straw man all day. So what we're doing is we've created an argument that looks like the original, and now we can attack it instead of the original. You can see it's just a slight diversion. So instead of going after the primary target, we have a slight diversion. For example, someone says, hey, I think we should legalize marijuana. And you say, are you crazy? We can't legalize drugs. Did you catch that? Did you see what happened there? What was the initial argument? We should legalize marijuana. And then the response, we can't legalize drugs. Oh, there's the change. It's slightly different. Marijuana is a drug, but so is meth. So is heroin. So is crack. Not too many people are out there trying to say we should legalize those things, except for like hardcore libertarians and, of course, people who are addicted to those things. It might be harder to have that marijuana fight, and maybe you don't think you can win that one. So you switch it to the we can't legalize all drugs, because that's a harder argument to for the other side to win, because there aren't, like I said, aren't too many people having that fight. So again, it's a slight variation, and now we're off track. So instead of talking about the marijuana issue, we're now talking about drugs, and now we've moved off task. A very similar thing to you as well is if, has someone ever misquoted you, taken you out of context? This is very common in political ads. You'll see somebody who's a politician who's at a campaign, and they're giving this really long speech. They're talking for 2 hours, and someone will take one sentence and say, boop, there you go, he said this. And all of a sudden that becomes the story. Well, again, that's a straw man. So instead of dealing with the issues at hand, they take this one sentence, twist it, take it out of context, whatever, and now you're arguing about that statement instead of the thing. I'll tell my students, let's say we're in the classroom talking about speeches in the 20th century, and you have the idea of Adolf Hitler gave speeches. So and he was capable and competent at giving speeches. So let's just say, hypothetically, I'm talking about Adolf Hitler and his speeches in World War II, and I say that Hitler was great when it came to giving speeches. Now, if someone was walking by and they heard me say Hitler was great and didn't hear the rest of it, that, great at giving speeches, if they just heard that first part, they'd be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe Dr. Talbert said that. And I'd probably be in the provost's office having a meeting. Why are you saying that Hitler is great? It's like, what are you talking about? Someone's heard you say that. It's like, oh, I was talking about speeches and someone heard that snippet, and now we're arguing about whether or not I think that Hitler was great. And you can see how quickly that just that little misrepresentation can change an entire argument. So you have to be careful. You'll see that kind of thing happen. And I'm sure it's happened to you where someone took something you said out of context or twisted it. I mean, it happens all the time whenever we're playing, like with texting or with any other kind of text-only type of thing, because it's easy to miss intention. It's easy to miss tone, sarcasm, all that kind of stuff. It's easy to twist that kind of thing. So that's, again, a straw man. So you think, I got the original. This is slightly different. So I have a slight turn. Now, what happens if the turn is greater? Like, I'm just going to get us off track altogether. Well, that is called a red herring argument. So if you think of the idea of a red herring, again, go back to the days of tally-ho, let's get the dogs and have the hounds chase the foxes. Well, a good hound will be able to chase and follow the fox. So you release the fox, give it some time to escape, and then the hounds track it, and you go get the fox. That's too easy. A good hound will find that fox pretty quickly. So what they would do is they would throw red herrings along the trail, fish, and the dog would just be cruising along. All of a sudden, doop, and then off track all of a sudden. So instead of chasing the fox, they're now going after this scent of this fish. A good dog would know how to pass by that scent because they'd be locked onto that fox. But again, it's one of those things, just like with arguing. If you're good at argumentation, you would stay locked on the argument. But we often get pulled off this little tangent somewhere. Like someone will bring up some other thing. Well, what about this? Well, what about that? And maybe that's happened to you. You'll try to have a conversation with somebody, a good friend or a spouse, and you'll say, I have a problem when you do this one thing. And they say, well, what about when you do this other thing? It's like, whoa. We were talking about this thing, and now all of a sudden you're talking over here. So again, the good dog, the good one who's arguing would stay. No, we're not going to talk about that. If you want to talk about the thing I did later, that's fine. But we're going to talk about this thing now. So this is a very common one. You'll hear this all the time. Again, like the I don't like when you do this thing. Well, what about when you do this other thing? Boom, instantly diverted. And now we're fighting about that instead of the initial issue. So that's a very common thing. So again, straw man, slight divergence, red herring, greater divergence. Now, what about when we go for a large divergence? Just totally way off base, and it almost guaranteed to pull you off topic. Well, that's typically what we call a non sequitur. A non sequitur means it does not follow. So you think of an idea of, we have an argument, we're going about a certain topic, and then you don't like how it's going, so you throw out something radical that makes us veer way off course, a major diversion. For example, you say, I'm concerned about the immigration issue at the southern border, and I think we should talk about those policies. And someone says, well, that's because you're racist. And you're like, wow, how do you handle that kind of thing? Because again, in a non sequitur, the person may or may not be racist. I mean, whatever. But that's not relevant to the conversation. But what you did, you threw this non sequitur out. And how do you not respond? If someone calls you a racist, like, what do? You say, well, sure, but let's keep talking anyway. Or, gee, no, I'm not, but let's keep talking. I mean, it's hard to not address that, Now, of course, you could always say, that is a terrible accusation. Shame on you for doing it. I'm talking about the policy, and if you can't have that conversation, well, then it's not worth me spending time to talk with you. That would be an easy way to bring it back, but it's a common thing. You're racist. You're sexist. You're bigoted. You're a homophobe. And you have all of these things where they just veer you off. They throw out all these different cards, and they play them to get you to veer off topic, because again, most people can't handle that assault to their character, so they go, and now we're no longer talking about that policy or whatever that issue is. I'm trying to salvage my integrity. So that's a big problem. So again, with the topic at hand, the straw man takes us off at a little deviation. The red herring takes us off topic on a bigger deviation, and then the non sequitur is a major deviation. So again, you'll see this commonly. Again, if you know how to handle it, it's not too hard. It's just a matter of trying to get them back on topic. Now, you might find very often that a lot of people say, and they'll keep throwing those things to get you off topic, and sometimes you just have to to walk away from an argument. But in most cases, you get, look, that's not important, or that's unfair, or that's a terrible thing to say, or that's not the topic at hand. Let's come back to the topic. That's a quick, easy way to do it. And if they keep going, you'd say, if you're going to use logical fallacies all this time, come back when you're ready to have a serious conversation, and then just walk away. Let's talk about other logical fallacies now. And these are different categories of appeals. So the first one is an appeal to consequences. A simple one I tell my students that always trips them up, because they'll say, how's this a logical fallacy? If you don't study, you'll fail the test. Well, that sounds right. I mean, that's a very reasonable thing to say, that if you don't study, you'll fail. How's that a logical fallacy then? Did you catch why? Well, here's the problem. You can't tell the future. That's illogical. You can reason out A will probably lead to B, but you can't guarantee it. A person could guess, if it's a multiple choice test and they just guess their way through it and they could get 100%. I mean, it could just be an amazing, stroke that day that they just got all of them right while guessing. So they didn't study at all. They got 100%. Who knew? I mean, statistically, it's possible. Is it likely? No. Most likely you will fail the test if you don't study. But since we can't tell the future, the appeal to consequences, it just might not happen. So like if you don't clean your room, you're going to get grounded. Well, that's very possible. That's how you're going to carry out the threat. But again, a lot of stuff could happen. Like an asteroid hits your house. Well, who needs to clean the room now? The house is on fire. But you don't know what the future's like. So something could happen between now and then. So it's just one of those things that makes it a logical fallacy. It doesn't mean it's an untrue thing. It just, because you can reasonably say that. You can reason your way through the cause and effect, but that doesn't mean it's a logical thing, because again, we can't tell the future. Another thing that's very common, an appeal to pity. Appeal to pity is very commonly used, and it's also a logical fallacy. And it should be fairly obvious why it's a logical fallacy, because this is an emotional appeal that's based on sympathy. Now you'll see with sympathy, you'll see the word pathy in there, pathos. Again, that's, ethos, logos, pathos. Pathos is emotion. So it's an appeal to pathos, an appeal to emotions there. Therefore, it's not an appeal to logos, logic. That's why it's a logical fallacy. Is it a bad appeal? No. I mean, emotional appeals work very often. I mean, you see nonprofits do it all the time. They could tell you a very logical appeal, and like when you see an ASPCA ad for dogs, they can say every year 1 million dogs are euthanized. Please donate so we can help save these dogs from being euthanized. Or please adopt a dog today, kind of thing. So that's a statistic thing. It's a logical thing to talk that way. Or you could do the pathos thing, which is typical. They show the dog in the cage and it's shivering and they're playing the sad Sarah McLachlan music and you're crying and you're throwing money at the television to make it stop. Those are very pathos based. Again, emotional appeal, not logical. That's why it's a logical fallacy. So that's very common. Another thing is an appeal to force, which is closely related to that. Now, of course, this is coercion and threats. Obviously, very unethical. It's still an appeal. Does it work? Well, I mean, have you ever said, if you don't stop that behavior, I'm going to give you a reason to be crying, or something like that. You're going to get a spanking if you do that thing. I mean, that's a threat. That's force. Sometimes we do that kind of a thing. But again, it's not logical because, one, we don't know the future because there's that consequences thing that's coming in, but also the whole idea of, the ethics that come into play, to threaten people. It doesn't, fit well under the ethical framework. A very common one that we tend to see too is the idea of an appeal to authority. So when you think of an appeal to authority, that's some expert says something, therefore it's legitimate. Again, a logical fallacy. Why? Well, just because an expert says it. I mean, that might be a good reason, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you. So you'll see like 9 out of 10 dentists tell you to use this toothpaste. It's like, okay, I mean, that might be good, but maybe my mouth is different than everyone else's mouth, maybe another toothpaste works just as good or maybe even better. So why do I need to use that brand? Or you see an ad for Gillette razors and Tom Brady's there and he's telling you to use Gillette razors and you can be terrific just like Tom Brady. It's like my face and his face are different. So a Gillette razor might work great for him, but not necessarily for me. So big deal. Or you'll see an ad with Taylor Swift and shampoo and boy, don't you want have your hair as lovely as Taylor Swift's? Well, go down the shampoo aisle at Walmart and see there's like 500 different bottles of shampoo down there because everyone's hair is different and what you're trying to do with it and all that fun stuff. So, and like your hair and Taylor Swift's hair are probably totally different. So just because she likes it doesn't mean you will and it'll work for you. But again, that works because we look up to people in authority. So if a doctor says something, we pay attention. If our mechanic says something, we pay attention. If a movie star or an athlete says something, we tend to pay attention. Study after study that shows advertising that just has a regular person sells X amount of product, and as soon as you have a celebrity or some other person of authority in there, they just sell more. We tend to buy those things, which is why you end up looking at the grocery store or whatever, and you see somebody's face on a box and you buy it instead of the generic box, just because you're drawn by that celebrity endorsement. So another one is the bandwagon appeal, and people who follow sports know this one all too well. So like someone like me who grew up as a Pirates fan, they're winning, then they're losing, then they're winning, then they're losing. And when they're winning, all of a sudden everyone's a Pirates fan, and when they're losing, there's like 10 of us left. And then they're winning again, and everyone's a Pirates fan, they're losing, and there's 10 of us left. It's just the idea of like, when they're on the upswing, everyone's like, oh yeah, I love the Pirates. It's like, can you even name a player? It's like, there's that guy on third base, but the face. And they don't know, but they're winning, so woohoo, I want to be on the winning team too. So they jump on the bandwagon, that because they don't want to be rooting for nobody. They don't want to be rooting for the losers, so they're rooting for the people who are winning. Just like when Taylor Swift was, making waves in the NFL by her dating Kelsey, and the idea of all these Swifties who are tuning in to watch the Kansas City Chiefs play. I mean, they probably didn't know anyone else on the team, but boy, they knew they were Chiefs fans just because Taylor Swift was dating one of the players. Again, that's just one of those things. It's not logical at all. That's purely an emotional appeal, and so again, a logical fallacy. Besides, you don't know what you might like. A typical bandwagon appeal, like you might have heard growing up. Like a mother would typically say, like, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump too? Well, I mean, it depends. What's the bridge look like? It could be a lot of fun, maybe so. But, that's your mom warning about the bandwagon fallacy. And then the last one I want to talk about is the idea of the false dilemma. And the false dilemma comes in a couple different ways. There is the complex question, or there's also what we call the bifurcation that you see with two options. Now, when you see a false dilemma, you see two choices, two. So you're typically pushed in a corner under pressure and you're given a choice. It's either this or this, pick something, which is it going to be? And you're like, but really almost always there are multiple options. There's not one or the other. It's usually multiple. Very few things have one or the other. Like abortion is a one or other. I mean, you can't half abort a baby. It's either aborted or not. So that argument is a true one. Now you can argue about what month or what trimester abortion should be limited to or anything like that. You can have all of those different instances. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the actual act, it's one or the other. But almost everything else on the planet is multiple choice. So you can choose this, you can choose this, you can choose this. And it doesn't really even matter which one you choose. But the idea of a false dilemma is that you have one or the other pick. And usually, like I said, when you're under pressure, that's usually what happens. And then the complex question, the typical stereotypical one, the guy's in court and the lawyer says, tell me, have you stopped beating your wife? It's like, well, whichever, if you say yes, that means you have been. If you say no, that means you still are. That question's worded in a way that you're in trouble either way. But what we typically see when we see the complex question is like if you ever get pulled over, what does the cop say? Comes to your window and say, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Well, why do they ask you that question? Well, it's quite simple. They put you into this complex question situation where as soon as you tell them, "I was speeding," boom, you've just admitted guilt. You've incriminated yourself, and now they can write you the ticket, and you can't fight it because you just admitted to the officer, and probably on body camera, admitting that you broke the law. So why did you know why I pulled you over? I ran the stop sign. Well, thank you. There's your ticket. So if you say, "I don't know, why did you?" "I have no idea, officer," then you're out of the complex question issue. But that question is complex because it's generated in such a way to make you admit guilt and frame yourself. So that's why it's a logical fallacy, because it's illogical for you to put yourself into this ethical bind. So those are some very basic. There are tons and tons. People who study argumentation and debate will get into dozens more, but those are some of the most basic ones you'll see when you're in conversation with other people, especially like on social media, and you start having arguments and disagreements about things, and it could be about anything, about what your best pizza flavor is, or what anything else you want to talk about. Doesn't matter. When you start seeing these kind of things pop up, recognize them and say, that's a logical fallacy, try again. But pay attention, because they get used a lot. And if you're using them, try to cut back. Work on sharpening your argumentation skills. Don't rely on logical fallacies to win the day. Try to find a way to sharpen your knowledge and be a better arguer and wrestle with those other people. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you so very much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in anyway. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.